Biographically, you need to know that our speaker is an incredibly successful businesswoman. You need to know that she has been, for a very long time, over a decade, a transparency campaigner in the City of London, and for fairness and the proper treatment of people who are disadvantaged through the NHS and through the social services. There is a context for being here right now, which is remarkable. There are two contexts. There is the political context of the appalling travesty of the Windrush scandal coinciding with the visit of the Commonwealth heads of government and the anniversary of Stephen Lawrence's murder, which must alert our European friends and neighbours, if any alert was possibly necessary, about the true nature of some of the prejudice that informs some of the politics in this country. There's another more immediate context of today. Even as we speak here in Cardiff, in Washington, President Macron is sitting down with President Trump to discuss Iran. I mention this because President Macron, although a seasoned political operative, was also a man who inspired people beyond politics, beyond the narrow confines of party politics in his country, a country which was supposed to have too rigid a political framework to bend and to move forward. In Westminster today, they unveiled a bronze statue to Millicent Fawcett, another testimony to what exceptional people can do with this extraordinary electorate in Britain. It is, as we know from Martin Luther King, almost impossible to conceive of fighting hatred with hatred. You have to fight hatred with love. If the Brexit vote and the machinations of Cambridge Analytica and the Russians suggest anything about democracy which is imperiled, it is that its greatest vulnerability is to cynicism. You cannot fight cynicism with cynicism. You fight it with justice and with courage and with forthrightness. And therefore, I am particularly delighted that your guest here this evening is the wonderful Gina Miller.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That's the most extraordinary welcome on a very wet evening. I wrote this, and after that speech, I'm now not going to use it. Because I want to talk to you from the heart and from the head as well. Because we have such a fight ahead of us. And we don't have much time. And there's so many untruths or half-truths being spoken by politicians and commentators and media and journalists that we have to stop this now. Because I want to take you to a speech that Barnier made last night, which I read on the way up here. And I drew out 4 things from it. One was the realization that we have, or they have, no detail whatsoever from our government about what a future relationship will look like, or what is that they want. Secondly, transition. Transition is not a given. The transition deal will be decided on, as to whether we get it or not, probably at the beginning of next year, after ratification. It is not a given. Thirdly, if there is anything in the withdrawal agreement which has to be agreed by the 36 parliaments and our parliament, if there is anything, one line in there, that violates any international treaty, it will be thrown out by the European Parliament. Just think about those things. And when it comes to services, because as we've heard, apparently there is some realization by the government and the opposition that they might be sitting on a powder keg, that they're moving towards a customs union, something that looks like whatever fudge they're using today. A customs union does not resolve services. And we are an 80% service economy. So the other thing I drew out from Barnier's speech is when he said, or in the speech it says, because of our proximity to the EU, they will not allow any competitive advantage to be had by us by diverging in any area of services. So if you take those 4 things from the speech, plus the fact that we have, in effect, 7 to 8 months, when it took them 12 months to do the easy stuff, and they have no plan. And I spent 2 days before Easter meeting with the European Council, European Parliament, Steering Committee, 25 business associations from different sectors, and 27 countries outside of the EU, 2 days of back-to-back meetings, and everybody told me exactly the same 2 things. We are afraid there is no detail. We have not seen a single document, not once. And secondly, we don't understand how legally this will work. How will supply chain work? We don't understand. If you take all of that in context, where we are today is not a good place. Or is there something else going on? Have we got an incredibly clever government? Is Mrs. May going to go down in history as one of the greatest politicians we've ever had, who is playing the best game of poker you've ever seen, which is, let's just pretend we don't know what we're doing, and at the very end, the EU will get really worried and they'll give us everything we want. It's not going to happen for some very practical reasons. We are not as big a deal to the EU as time has gone on. Their big priorities is a trade war with China and America. They're worried about the split beyond Brexit because the 27 member states are fully aligned on Brexit. But beyond that, there are basically 3 blocks who have their own issues to deal with. North members, the southern members, the northern members, and possibly the more liberal members. And then there are the domestic issues of the rise of populism and the right in member states. Every day that goes by, we become less important to them. So this idea that they're suddenly just going to give us everything we want is not going to happen. They have to damage limitate, and that is where they are. The EU is drafting 40 pieces of emergency legislation in case we really don't know what we're doing and there is no deal. 40 pieces of emergency legislation, which means that things will more or less stay the same so they can operate across the border. So we don't have 20 to 30 mile queues on both sides of whatever border we end up having. So what are the practical things that we can do? Because I think that's where we need to concentrate on. Let's just stop all this, or what if? Let's just be practical. The rainbow of Remain, because I see it as a rainbow, there are very many people who want slightly different things, have got to come together in one battle, with one voice. And to me, there are timetables that will happen that means that you can coalesce with that one voice. Unfortunately, I thought one of them was going to be the June summit, because I thought Ireland would be the point when we would have a real target to fire at. What I'm hearing from the EU is that they're not going to sort of skate around Ireland. It's going to be pushed further down the road. It's not going to be that watershed moment, which is not good for us. at all. So maybe that won't be the big target we can aim at. So then, would it be autumn for our MPs? Because as you say, we're hearing that there is some movement towards customs union. Actually, it's not good enough. It's got to be single market for us to be able to, a minimum, for us to be able to have some sort of level of prosperity from where we are at the moment. In my view, it's about security as well, hugely about security, because we have no agreement on sharing data, on Europol, arrest warrants. We have no idea how Open Skies is going to work, because unless airlines have 51% of EU ownership, they won't be able to fly. That's BA, EasyJet, Ryanair. I mean, I could go on all day, and I'm sure lots of you here already know the detail of how impossible this is. But how do we make autumn a point where the weather, we create the weather? And the only way I can see is Parliament. And I stand before you saying that when they basically rubber-stamped everything I'd fought for. And I don't believe they've really discovered their courage yet. Thursday will be interesting to see when it comes, when the customs union comes back to the House of Commons. But that's only a one-line whip. It'll give us a bit of a check on temperature of how they're feeling, but I don't think it will tell us exactly how they'll vote when there's a three-line whip, which there probably will be in autumn. And what if Mrs. May goes back on her meaningful vote? Because from everything I'm hearing, she's so worried about it, she might not actually allow it to be a proper vote. It may be a very watered-down resolution, which again doesn't help us. So it's the MPs. We have got to find a way of making sure that every single MP's box, email, bin, I don't care if they throw them away, let the bins overflow. We cannot allow them to not hear our voices. We have got to be outside their surgeries, feel at every opportunity. We have to let them know that we are not happy with what's being offered by this government and the opposition. They have to listen to the people of this country, and that's all of us. And they have to stop talking about this nonsensical will of the people. It is pure and utter nonsense. Democracy is not one day, one time, one vote in the will of the people. It is a social construct that was brought up by the far right. It is nonsense. The will of the people changes on a daily basis, depending on the issues of the day. The will of the people is not something that's set in stone, and we have to stop, call out every single media journalist, whoever says that to you. If anybody is in front of a journalist who says, but what about the will of the people? Say to them, why are you allowing this to become part of the rhetoric of our country? You are not being a patriot every time you repeat that phrase. It is not the will of the people that we allow politicians to lie just to be in power, to be able to deceive people just so that their party can stay in power. That is not the will of the people. The will of the people is to elect politicians who will put the country before their party, that they will act with integrity and honesty, that they will ask the hard questions and have the hard conversations, because that's what statesmen and women do. That is why we pay their salary. What about if we stopped? What about if we stopped paying their salaries? Because if things carry on as they are, I think there's a place for peaceful action and demonstration. Because I can't see that this Kool-Aid is going to stop being drunk and somehow poisoning people's common sense and reason. If this carries on, at some point, get to autumn, we may have to have peaceful resistance. I've been told that if I say this in too many places, I may well be arrested. I want them to arrest me. Because it's going to give me the best platform I can get. So I'm daring them. I'm saying, come on then. Come on then. I will not allow the bullies to win. And they are bullies and liars, and they're neglectful. If I, in my business, behave the way the politicians behave, I would not be in my job. If a teacher, a principal, whatever your jobs are, if you behave like the politicians, you would not be in your job. Can you imagine going into work and lying, barefaced lying, and then being able to turn up the next day? It would not happen. So why are we allowing it to happen in our parliament? We have to start being bolder, and we have to confront the bullies. And we have to confront those people who are saying, oh, well, if the politicians are not brave enough, then a people's vote is nonsense, it's undemocratic. It is the most democratic thing you can do. If the politicians are too cowardly to take the decision, well, give it back to us. Let the people make the decision if you're too cowardly to do it. I actually sat with a professor of gaming theory who works in Harvard, and we sort of gamed out all the options. And actually, we came up with the conclusion that because the politicians have painted themselves down or taken themselves down a cul-de-sac, and they don't actually want to dirty their hands with making a decision, and they prefer to stay silent and blame the other person and say, it's not our fault, it's their fault, they did a really bad job, they're incompetent, not us, then really, giving it back to the people is actually the only solution that they can get away with. Because then they can say, it wasn't our fault. It was the fault of the people. So, we have to just be realistic, because as we stand today, and the polls, the real polls of polls, we're leaving. That's reality. We are leaving. And if the ratification process, we get to Parliament in autumn, and they're not brave enough, and by the way, you know that 20 to 30 MPs and Conservative you keep reading now and again are going to rebel? The real number is 6 or 8. And it will be the arithmetic, the maths is that it will be level because of the Labour, 6 or 8. The maths in Parliament are not on our side. And then this idea that a new political party is suddenly going to come up and make it. We don't have the time. We do not have the time. We have got to get radical. I'm sorry, but we do. And we've got to find ways of not just doing it by turning up to rallies. We've got to do it on social media at every opportunity. I've now taken to a new tactic on Twitter. The more rude somebody is, the more polite I am, and I answer them. I've taken to answering them very politely. I actually put there so-and-so. And it's amazing how little they have to come back with that's actually an argument or a debate. Because we have to call out everyone everywhere who's talking nonsense and just repeating these vacuous words that mean absolutely nothing and will not resolve any problems for us and will not come up with a solution. So we've got to be able to push the politicians. And if the politicians don't want to get their hands dirty, then you push them for a people's vote. It is, as I said, the most democratic thing to do. And if you want a bit of ammunition of how you sell that argument to the politicians, well, we were defrauded. There's dark money and dark forces that were used and tactics that were used. There are massive question marks over the last vote. If it was a court decision, it would be deemed a mistrial. And there would be a retrial. That's what would happen. So if you want to make sure that this country heals and we go forward and everybody, Remain, Leave, can come together, we need to have a clean vote on the real options. And then we can move forwards. Because The charge I want to lay at the door of our MPs is negligence. The money that's being spent on Brexit, the 14 laws or more that are not being debated, the domestic agenda that's being ignored. We have a zombie parliament who do nothing. They go home early. There's not even any select committees, really, on anything. They're desperate to do something because there is no bandwidth. It's only Brexit. Nothing else is being addressed. The domestic causes of Brexit are not being addressed. It is shameful, and we have got to, as the people of Britain, we have to take civic action, and we have to take back control. Because the politicians won't do it. I have been appalled close up at how vacuous they are. I am appalled at the excuses they give me. It's not the right time. We have to wait and see. Well, if we did that, we'd lose our older voters, our younger voters, our voters. It's reeled off every day. And I say to them, are you not a politician? Are you not supposed to be doing the hard work and holding this government's feet to the fire? Because if it's not your job, then resign now and save this country some money, because we're going to need it. Ask them why they're not doing their jobs. If they can't give you an answer, give them, and I've done this actually, print out a P45, you saw it being given to the Prime Minister, and give it to them and say, well, I'm sorry, you're not doing the job I elected you to do, or my taxes are paying you to do. Why don't you leave? Let's get bold, because this is not impossible. I'll quote to you somebody I admire, actually two people I admire, and every time I quote their names, people laugh at me. The first is Bruce Lee, who says, you have to absorb the energy and redirect it. Absorb the abuse. This is what I do. And the negativity, and I turn it round and direct it somewhere else, something positive. We can all do that. And the second person is Muhammad Ali, who, when asked about the idea of impossible, he said impossible was a state of mind. It was a dare to do something that makes everything possible. And that's what we have to not think, that this is impossible. We still have time to change this. But if we leave it to behaving in a way that basically means that somebody else is going to find the solution, or that the politicians are going to find the solution, I really don't think they will. So I'll leave it there for the moment, and I'm sure there'll be lots of questions. Before we go to questions, there's one other thing I wanted to make clear. There's a misconception that in my court case, because the Act of Parliament went through, Article 50 is not revocable. We never ever discussed Article 50. We deliberately, with the government, agreed that Article 50 would not be discussed. My case was black and white about the royal prerogative and the parliamentary sovereignty. So if anyone says to you that my case made sure that it was set in law, Article 50 was never discussed. And if you speak to John Kerr, European Parliament, the President of the EFTA Court, Council Parliament, they've all said if the UK wanted it, it would be revoked. So that is not something that we need to waste time discussing.